Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to India Game Changer. We're not sure what we're going to get today, but I'm pretty sure we're going to get something good. Today we are joined by Shubhankar, Srivastava, and Divyansh Saini, co-founders at Houseware. Shubhankar, you've been on this show before, so you're a little bit out of luck with a little bit of a self-introduction. But Divyansh, thank you so much for joining this time. How are you doing?
Doing very well, Michael, and thanks a lot for having me on the show.
It
Really
is
excited to be joining you.
Yeah, it is my complete pleasure. We've been waiting for this for a while. And before we get to the main part of this conversation, whatever that's going to be, let's get a bit of your background for some context.
Absolutely. So, as you rightly mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Houseware. What we do at Houseware is essentially we are building a solution for revenue operations teams to figure out like how to build data applications, how to make them creators of data. It's been a little over 9 months since Shubhankar and I have been working together on this problem statement. Prior to that, I have been in the data space myself for the last 5 years or so now. I was previously the first head at this company called Atlin. It's a $500 million company in the data catalog market. And as the first head in that company, joining at a pretty early stage, you pretty much do anything and everything. So sales, marketing, account management, data stuff, and more importantly, I embedded myself with a bunch of our customers as a data person. So these are companies like Fortune 500s in CPG, companies in the dev tool startup space, companies in the fintech ecosystem, and which is where I really came across the problem that we are solving today at Houseware. And Shubhankar and I, we go back now close to 5 years of knowing each other. And yeah, that's how Houseware came to be. So that's
So,
a little bit about me.
yeah, just a couple of quick questions. So, you're working for this $500 million company. I presume it was, if you were the first hire, right? It was a startup in and of itself. What makes you join the startup world? Like, have you had a corporate style job, or did you just go straight from university into like small, agile startup companies?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think very from the very beginning of my internships, going back to like my freshman year of college, I've been just interning at startups.
Really?
I have, yeah. So I think the motivation to build something of your own and to build something which can drive meaningful impact and where you can lead from the front has always been there for me. And I did have like a bunch of corporate exposure by the virtue of like almost being a consultant to our customers in the $500 million company that I was mentioning. So I pretty much spent almost a year working inside a Fortune 500 from their offices and get to experience that as well, which helps me sort of figure out like who our customers are and what they would need.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get back to that in a second, but I'm much more curious about where this. Look, if you go to a good university, if you get into one, right, you must have done well in your school prior to that. There's always this family pressure, right? Whether you're in India or in Connecticut, to like just go get a job, don't let the family down, like don't do something risky, right? Why not do something not easy, right, but easier and stable? Is there entrepreneurship in your family as well? Like, were your mom and dad like, look, dad's never had a job, dad's always been an entrepreneur, or mom's always been an entrepreneur, and you followed kind of in their footsteps, or did you kind of do this on your own? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and again, like that's something that I've spent a bunch of time thinking about. Like, where does this,
Come from?
I would say, bug come from, right? And the convincing answer that I was able to find was that it was quite the other way around. It was not that I did have any or many entrepreneurs in my family. It was the other way around that I've seen my father working for the Indian government. I've seen how hard it can get, and
Yeah,
when you
it's hard.
don't really control the environment and the kind of things that you want to do, how do you really break through from that is by building something that you really want to do. And which is where I think the motivation really came from, by looking at the environment of how typically the mainstream jobs, so to say, are. And not to say that it's anything bad, that I would want to do that sometime maybe in the future, but that's something which made me realize that, hey, this is something that I want to do. I want to create an organization which people love working at, which creates an environment and culture of trust and equality between people.
Do you take risk in other parts of your life? Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of people that are entrepreneurs will do like helicopter skiing, or they'll like big wave surf and or skydive or something like that. Is that something you do as well, or do you like take all of your risk in this format?
I think I'm taking risk all day, every day. That's part of the job in general. But jokes aside, I think yeah, I've been quite big on the risk side, and it really started from the fact that I went to a school to study engineering, and I dropped out of engineering. I just like graduated in 4 years, thinking that, hey, I don't really need a degree which validates what I am or who I am. I can just like make my mark in the world by working at places, by proving what my merit really is inside an organization. And it started like much back when I was 18, 17. I started doing like taking these small risks, eventually which compounded into joining and starting houseware. And yeah.
So I want to get back to this being embedded in big corporations, right? Because I do think, and you're talking to somebody, that means Michael, who spent his whole life like getting his soul destroyed inside of big companies, right? And I think it's different than being embedded. We can talk about that if you want in a moment. But do you feel like what do you think you learned from being inside those companies? And did you always kind of get the sense that that was your only way in to experience that? Like a lot of the entrepreneurs that I talk to consider themselves in quotes like unhireable in a way, right? Because they do want to lead from the front as opposed to kind of following from the side or from the back. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I think my experience while I was embedded inside this large Fortune 500 for more than a year was, I would say, quite eye-opening for me. There were a lot of good things about it, and the best part was that you get a best of both worlds. You're working at a startup which is pretty fast-paced, doesn't really have any, I would say, dress code, so to say, where people are just like coming in, walking into the office, and working on like really cool stuff. At the same time, there's this organization which is everyone is dressed in formals and dress shoes and whatnot, and you would see like a lot of people working in the office, coming in into the elevator, and sort of making this large, big machinery work. So it almost like was a, I would say, paradigm shift from me when I used to work from the startups office versus when I used to work from this Fortune 500 office. I
Did you
do think that.
did you
Yeah,
dress
sorry.
differently? Do you know what I mean? Like if for that year that you were going to this other company, did you have to put on like proper trousers and a proper shirt? And like some days you'd go back to the startup and they'd be like, dude, were you way too dressed up for this kind of thing?
Yeah, I guess when you're the customer facing person, you do have to dress differently, I guess. To you dress for who you're meeting. And yeah, in most cases. So I did, in fact. And as funny as it sounds, it's a lot of learning experience for me because I
Yeah.
had never experienced what a Fortune 500, how they operate, what is the decision making like, how does top down follow as an approach from a strategic point of view, and also how does bottom up really play out? Who are these individual contributors in different parts of the organization who can eventually rise up and like really change something inside an organization? So, a bunch of interesting phenomena as human behavior, which you see happening in these organizations, just because these are like small pots of people who are working towards a very large machinery that's working. A bunch of interesting learnings there around what makes people think alike, what makes people not think alike, how can
Yeah.
you really channel their thoughts to a certain direction and things like that, which is I think super helpful as an entrepreneur because you're always telling your story. You're always telling your story about why people should be working with you, why people should be investing in you, and more importantly, why your customers should find the value that you are looking to showcase to them. Yeah.
You said something really interesting before, right? You said when you were 18 or when you were in school, you were studying engineering and you decided to stop doing that. And it always reminds me of this funny story that a gentleman from India said on stage when I was there for a startup event. It must have been now in like 2017 or 2018. And he was, I think I've actually said this to Shubhankar, but if you haven't heard this, Divyansh, you should hear it and just tell me what you think. He was making kind of a presentation or just talking about the company that he was building, which was an ed tech company, right? And his parents were not proud. And he said the reason why is that, he said, for me, at least in my family and in India at scale, like there are really only three professions you can have, right? One is a doctor, two is an engineer, and three is a family disappointment. And I just love that I cannot stop thinking about it when you say this. And that's why I always ask this question. Like, my mom and my dad wanted me to be a lawyer and my brother to be a doctor. That's just a fact, right? And my brother's a neurosurgeon. So good on him, and a very successful one and kind of a famous one, to be fair. I was never a lawyer. Do you know what I mean? And you can laugh, but like there was some disappointment. And there was always this like, that's what you're going to do? Really? And I'm just curious, right? Because you said your dad worked for the government, which is the ultimate sort of, it's hard. Like that's super hard work, right? But it's the ultimate in conservative, right? Because that job's never going to go away. Was there some concern for you when you were just like, yeah, never mind. I'm not going to be an engineer. I'm just going to kind of do what I want to do kind of thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think, Michael, we have much more in common than we thought earlier. So my sister is also a radiologist by profession. And I think my parents also wanted my sister to be a doctor and me to be an engineer. And I ended up being in the third category, as you rightly mentioned.
Same here.
But yeah, interestingly, I think one thing which I started doing and telling my parents very early on is my ambitions. So when I just was graduating from my senior school, and this is when you enter college into engineering, I
Yep.
told them that, hey, this is the last time when I'm studying. And they thought, "Hey, this guy's joking." That's what probably everyone says when they're entering college, right? And I entered the college in my freshman year of college. The first semester, the results come, and they're like, "Oh, this guy is really serious. He's actually not going to study." And by that time, I had already started sort of making some moves into the startup ecosystem. I was already interning. This is,
Right.
as I said, like when I was
I
18.
love it.
So they were like pretty happy that at least I'm doing something,
Yeah.
and that keeps them going. I guess like over time, like they've found like enough convincing material that, hey, this guy's up to something. Let's just leave him to do whatever he wants, and they're pretty supportive in that way. And they've never really sort of tried to push me into one direction or the other. Um, yeah, but as you can understand, like coming from a family where government job is probably what people value a lot, at least in the previous generation,
Yeah,
they
for sure.
do feel that, hey, there's a little bit of uncertainty in this new way of how startups are being formed. Startups also, there are a lot of layoffs happening in today's seasons, right?
Yep.
And recession coming. So a lot of those glooming things, but at the same time, like they believe in me. Hopefully they do. And that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps them going.
I'm sure they do. I want to talk about Atlan just a little bit, right? Because as employee number one, you said you were the first person hired into there, and now you said it's a $500 million company. At some point, they must have known, like these must be your friends or people that you knew from somewhere, right? They must
Yep.
have known this dude's definitely going to leave at some point because, like you say, you want to lead from the front and you cannot lead from the side. Like it's almost not possible.
Yep.
I'm sure they were supportive when you did leave. Like, yep, we kind of knew this was going to happen, and maybe we'll also be a client kind of thing because he can help us do this, that, or the other thing from his own perch. But what was the trigger for you? Like, what was it where you said, I got it now? Like, I think I've learned enough. I've experienced enough from the corporate side and from the startup side, and I've seen a little bit of ups and a little bit of downs, but now I want to do this on my own. What was that trigger? Do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it had been 3 years when I was at Atlan. I had seen like a full circle of journey going from no product, just an idea in people's minds, having a team of like almost like 60 people working now towards that idea, many customers who are finding like really good value out of it, investors validating it, which it's important. So
Yep.
I left Atlan at Series A in around March 2021. And the trigger for that was largely that I had spent 3 years at this company doing 0 to 1 with really good founders, really good investors. And like you rightly mentioned, I had always wanted to lead from the front in an organization that I am setting up
Yeah.
in the ways and the forms that I wanted to be. And people knew that. I think the one thing that I say often to people is that I had joined Atlan to leave. Obviously, someday I just didn't know when. And at some point, I stopped thinking that, hey, I got a startup. I was not really actively thinking that, hey, I got to like quit one day. I was putting all my effort into building this
Sure.
company, which is now a great company. And yeah, the trigger point, as you mentioned. So I think it was December of the end of the year 2020. And this is the time when I was thinking what next in the next year I'm going to do from an Atlan perspective and what I'm going to be working on. And I was at that point leading alliances and technology partnerships and in this company in this role. And then I realized that I'm at a comfortable place. The company is growing. People are doing well. It's going to keep growing from here. And maybe I was 25 back then, 24 maybe. Maybe at this point, this is not what I really want to do. This is
Yeah.
not what I always wanted to do. So it was always a means to an end. And I think at that point is when it became clearer to me that, hey, I should probably start exploring. And good thing that was happening was the kind of problems that we are solving today at Houseware were the kind of problems that I never stopped talking about to all the people that I used to meet. So it was almost like a natural extension of the problem that I was seeing
Pretty
in the
normal.
customers that Atlan was working with. I was seeing this problem. I was talking to people about it, including people like Shubhankar, where I was co-founder dating a bunch of people and figuring out like, hey, is this really a problem?
So let me go to Shubhankar for a second, right? Because I feel like he's lonely in a way. Like it's really the only reason why. But where did
I'm
you
loving
two?
the conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's about to applaud actually. But where did you two meet each other? Did you? You may have mentioned that already, but
Yeah.
I don't remember. Like, where did you to meet each other, and why did you decide to found this together? Because Shubhankar, this is not your first time starting a
Yeah.
company from scratch. Yeah,
Yeah. So both of us went to the same college
makes sense.
in India, and we were 1 year apart. We knew each other from college days. I used to build side projects. I'm a computer science undergrad, so I loved building products. And what I used to do was, with a bunch of friends, push out one product and launch it with a group of friends, some early customers, maybe even put it on Product Hunt. At that point, Divyansh used to come in. At that point of time, to launch something on Product Hunt, you needed a hunter, and Divyansh and I kind of had that relationship where he used to help us launch products, and we started talking about what we're doing with data, what we're doing with startups. After that as well, I moved to Singapore to build this startup called Radicali,
Yep.
where we were building compliance SaaS. And in this startup as well, we were doing a lot of data pipelining. We were building algorithms and machine learning models to understand regulatory content. But behind all of that, essentially, you're building a bunch of data pipelines. And I used to be in touch with Divyansh because I knew he was building something cool at Atlin, this data catalog product. When I started to realize the pain of revenue teams and non-technical users, non-technical people like growth engineers, sales people, not understanding what data means. And I was facing that because I was serving their ad hoc requests on a day-to-day basis. Uh, when I started to talk with Divyansh about this problem, we realized, oh shit, there's something here. Uh, at that point, I was moving on from Radical Eye and thinking of my next step. And Divyansh actually came in at that right moment where this light bulb moment created a bunch of cycles in my head, and I decided this is worth giving everything up and like giving the next 10 years this particular problem statement. So yeah, that's where we met.
So I think a lot of founding teams struggle to find the right balance between a technical founder, like a computer science founder, right, who really
Mm.
understands. And we should be clear, right? A computer science founder doesn't just mean somebody who knows how to code stuff, right? Because there's a lot of architectural decisions that need to get made when you're building a company from scratch and when you're writing software from scratch that aren't necessarily coding per se, right? But that are architectural. What does this
Yep.
actually have to look like at scale before we get there? And then write the code to kind of build that. And I think people misunderstand this. They just think people that study computer science are just like, they learn how to write PHP or Ruby on Rails or C Sharp or whatever, and then they're done with it. But the science part of the computer science part is understanding a lot of the, what does the architecture have to look like to make it the most efficient type of thing. And I think people struggle also with this natural tension between, oh, that's just a sales and product guy, and the comp sci guy is the guy that knows everything. But I think the reality is that the combination there is really, it's more than 1 + 1 = 2. Is that fair, Divyansh? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and think a funny incident comes to my mind. So we were interviewing a person who had just come to our office for an engineering role. And it was me, Shubhankar, and this other person in the room. We were just like sort of breaking down the problem statement that they were going to work on. And he was first surprised to see me there because people expect, like, as you mentioned, like two co-founders. Okay, like one person is probably doing sales,
Yeah.
other person is doing engineering, and it's like a very clean split. That person found me within 15 minutes. I had pretty much rolled my sleeves. I opened up Postman running some APIs, and that person was super surprised. He's like, hey, "What is happening here?" Because I assumed that you are the
The
person
other
who's actually
guy.
just going out and yeah, the other guy, right? Like so, people have that perception of the other guy. But I think the reason why, and you were asking like our titles before the podcast itself. So the reason why we call ourselves co-founders because we are not just engineers or salespeople here individually. We are company builders, and we both have to build that company equally and sort of contribute to it. And we don't really have clean boundaries when it comes to some of these things, at least today, and intentionally so. So Shubhankar, just yesterday, he was at a customer's office the entire day long, working with our users, understanding their pain points, because that empathy has to flow back into the product and the engineering team. And on some days, you would find me being able to sort of resonate with the engineering team, understanding the kind of architecture decisions that they're making. Just because I've been in the data space, and there was a long time when in Atlin's team there were 25 engineers. I was the other guy, and when you're the only other guy in the room, you gotta absorb everything that they are saying, and they gotta also understand and respect like what you're saying. So you sort of work up to that to build that shared language and shared understanding that people are able to understand, and as you rightly mentioned, like build that architecture to scale in the future. So we don't see it that way in this stage of the journey, especially when we are very early. We don't try to fit ourselves into titles, and that goes across the team, I would say today. The website that you have behind you was again built by a person who actually is not an engineer, and he just like again like one day he just decided, hey, I want to make some changes to this. Can I do it? And we're like, why not? There's no one stopping here for anything. Yeah.
How big is the company now?
So we are 7 full-time employees.
Okay, that's good. So you're still interested. That makes me happy. Tell me now exactly, what does houseware do? Like, what were the problem sets that you were running into when you were at your other companies and you thought this actually needs to be its own thing?
Yeah, so I think the problem that houseware is trying to solve is been a problem for the last 5 decades or so, and we believe it's going to be a problem for the next couple of decades, even without us existing or existing. So I think the problem remains largely about the kind of roles that you mentioned. So there's always this data and engineering team, which is speaking the language of tables, rows, columns, schemas, none of which the people in the revenue function, who are people in sales, customer success, marketing, product, finance, understand. They don't really care about which table has what data about my customers,
right,
what schema it is stored in, what is the database, where is it hosted, and things like those. There's a shared language which is missing between these two functions, which is the revenue function, which we largely call, and the data and engineering function. Now, databases have existed and they've become really, really good in the last 5 decades. Now, you can spawn one up in whatever part of the world without having to sit there, and you can scale it up to multi petabytes of storage. But what is the hard challenge is like building that shared context and learning. So where houseware comes in is that it provides metrics as almost like a first-class citizen to anyone inside the revenue function to be able to build applications on top of it. So typically, people inside the revenue function, people in customer success, product have always been given dashboards, given reports, and saying that, hey, you do your stuff with this, and that's where you're limited to. The worlds are, I would say, converging to a point where these users are also now becoming technical enough to create applications. They have to, right? In a world where you're working in a technology company, you can't call yourself non-technical. That day and age is already gone. Right. And these users are really dying for an experience like houseware, where it becomes, I wouldn't say like dumbed down, but really simplified to an extent that they're still able to do super user stuff. So things like, who are the users on my applications who invited more than 5 users in the last 30 days? I want to send them a different kind of an email campaign. Something as simple as this today takes them like multiple CSV downloads from multiple different tools, uploading it elsewhere, and then finally writing down an email campaign, then sending it across. It shouldn't be this hard. It takes like somewhere between like 3 people getting data access, figuring out like where to upload it, what names and column names really mean, and then do it. So the way we solve this problem is that we provide them with a one-stop solution, which is a metrics to intelligent data apps product today. Now, metrics are the language that these people speak on a day-to-day basis. So these are daily active users, monthly active users, churn, which is the first-class citizen, and the atomic unit on top of which they build applications and the use cases on top of.
Look, are we presuming, and I just want to make an analogy, right? So when I was sitting on the trading desk, we spent a lot of time working with our support teams, our technical teams, right, to be able to write better applications so that we could trade better and understand what was happening with the trades that we were thinking about doing, the trades that we had done, all this stuff. But we never got to a point where it was low code enough that we could actually build that stuff ourselves, right? This is a while ago, but even so, like we knew what we wanted, or we thought we did, but we couldn't build it ourselves. But what happened over time was that they started hiring people that actually could. Right. But I think what you're suggesting is that you don't have to be a computer scientist to be able to understand, I need access to this kind of data. I don't care what it looks like in the database at all, actually. Just make sure that the database is valid, cleaned, and like relevant to me. And that if I need to do something or understand something, that I should be able to spin that up myself. Right? Is that fair? In other words, in the same way that 100 years ago, if you wanted to make a phone call, somebody had to connect a bunch of wires and press a bunch of buttons. And then today we just have a phone in our pocket that everybody knows how to use. Is that the same kind of thing?
Absolutely. I think you nailed it. And The reason for this is largely because all of this creation of insights has to sit closer to the outcomes. It cannot Data cannot just be treated as a service function where you relay them requests and then they
No.
come back with it. Decision making loop in today's day and age is too, I would say, long for you to be able to take dynamic decisions on your user base. Data is becoming that function now in an organization which is empowering rather. So how do you allow people inside sales, marketing, customer success, and they have like enough people who are quasi technical, like we like to say. So these are quasi technical users who are technical enough to build some of these applications. So these might not be your sales reps, but these might be your growth product managers. These might be your RevOps folks. Even in some cases, might also be like functional data analysts or finance data analysts who really want this data in their hands to build applications on top of.
I mean, to be fair, it feels like it's disintermediating a bunch of different problems, right? The first thing is that at some point, everything that used to be technical just becomes normal, and everybody knows how to do it, right? A cell phone or a mobile phone or a smartphone is the perfect example of this, right? Like if I had told you 20 years ago that your grandmother would be texting you on WhatsApp, you'd be like, that's never going to happen. And they wouldn't believe it either. It would seem like, space talk, but now everybody does that and they take it for granted. But on the other hand, too, the other problem is that like I may know in my mind what I want, and if I go to my data analysis team and say, I think I want this thing, by the time they get it back to me, first of all, I may have changed my mind, but second of all, I may realize that I explained it improperly. And then it creates this unnecessary cultural tension between, I always used to say when I was at Morgan Stanley that the guys in the equity controllers department were complete idiots. But I knew that the equity controllers thought that the guys in the fixed income controllers were complete losers. Until one of us switched departments, and then they were your best friends. I'm not kidding, because I saw it happen, but I realized this really early, because that's the way people talked about fiefdoms inside of these big companies. It's like, those guys are idiots. Until you go, okay, you're now reassigned to equities. And then you'd be like, these are the greatest guys in the world, which they always were. But I think inside big companies, it's always like that, right? So the data guys must think, oh, the salespeople are jerks.
Yeah.
But at some point, those functions actually merge, because neither one of those things is actually true, right? Anyway, so I think that's super interesting. And I guess that brings up something else for me. You want to lead from the front, right? And if you're starting again with 7 people, and it's important to you that anybody can make changes to the website, or that you consider yourself co-founders. And I kind of use this terminology before of like, you're the other guy. It's a joke I make to myself sometimes because I'm the other guy. But the reality is that you have to build a company culture that supports the fact that everybody doesn't have the same skill set, but all those skills are very useful. How important is this company culture to the both of you? And like, what do you do to make sure that it's growing the way you want it to grow? Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's a question we ask and we keep discussing on a daily basis. In fact, yesterday we had a long conversation about it as to how. So we started, the two of us started this September of 2021. Yep. We started hiring actively in Jan. The last 6 months have been fun, to say the least. Yep. We've built a bunch of systems that work right now. We've built a bunch of processes, some ambiguity that is deliberate, so as to have a system of shared communication so that we all know what we're all working on. But the next 6 months are going to be different. How we scale culture is going to be different, right? But given all of that, like your stage of the company might change, your role might change. What stays consistent is the values, right? The values about how you show up to work, whether you care about what you're building, that has to stay the same. Whether it is seed state, Series A state, Series B state. So that's something that we're trying to identify. What's that constant? And we call this like how you do anything is how you do everything. This should stay constant, whether it's your personal life, whether it's your professional life, whether it's the smallest bug that you're fixing a CSS element, or whether it's the architecture decision that you're taking for the next 5 years. How you do anything is how you do everything. So that's one of our guiding lines that we go with when it comes to culture. But it keeps changing. It requires constant thinking, constant checking in with people, checking in with myself. How am I feeling? Do I see that this is going to last for the next 6 to 12 months? How do I reinvent myself? How do I reinvent my team for the next challenge? But yeah, it's fun, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I was talking to a business partner of mine about the same exact thing today, right? Like when there are 6 of you or 7 of you, it's pretty easy to have your company culture be consistent and to make sure that those values are consistent as well. And I like this idea of like deliberate ambiguity. We want to leave some things where it's not like the only way to do this is step 1, step 2, and step 3, because that's what you're stuck with, right? But as long as you have these sort of open lines of communication, you run less of a risk that things are going to be misinterpreted. Yeah, and Divyansh, I'm kind of curious for you because you saw that 0 to 1 movement. And to get from 0 to 1, you have to go from no employees to 60 or 70 or 100 or whatever it is. Did you learn anything along the way? Do you know what I mean? Where you like made mental notes to yourself like, you know, we shouldn't do this or shouldn't do that kind of thing? And I don't even really care what they are. I'm just kind of curious overall. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And I think few of the things that come to my mind, like one of the things that I keep repeating to the team on a very consistent basis is the fact that our allegiance in this market is to the problem, not to the solution. What that means is that, hey, we are always be striving for understanding the problem in the best possible way. We might not have the best solution. We might build something, but you might also break it and you might move away from it just because the market wants something else and we are learning about the problem. So like this is something which stays true, I guess, for a company stage, irrespective whether you're at pre-seed or seed or even like Series D companies are trying to find product market fit. Yeah. It's just that it's in a different arena, a different buyer persona. So how do we keep reinventing ourselves and getting to understand the problem at a very core is something which is very important to us and something which I have learned in my previous journey as well, that if let's say you're true to yourself, true to the market that you're building for, you will eventually land up at the right solution as long as the team is good. And that's the kind of belief that we have, that we'll do our best to get the best people to build this. And as long as we understand the problem, we'll arrive at the solution. It might take like 2 months, it might take like 2 years. We don't know that. But when we arrive, we arrive. So, yeah.
It's a really interesting issue, right? You know, I said I worked at these big companies for my whole career and it was kind of soul destroying, but I'll leave that to the side. I struggle with how to create the right level of structure so that it's balanced enough so that that ambiguity that you talk about is still there, but that people can get things done because you've structured whatever the environment is in which people need to work so that they understand what they need to do, if that makes sense, while still maintaining that ambiguity so that the creativity doesn't get slowed down. Yeah, and that's a hard thing to do. Anyway, I love this. When you said how you do anything is how you do everything, I was like, oh God, it's like a gift given from the guests always to have the title of the show. And then Divyansh ruined it by saying allegiance is to the problem, not to the solution. Now what am I supposed to do? I have to flip a coin at some point. Anyway, you guys are awesome. I hope you've enjoyed this. I really want to thank both of you for doing this. This was really incredible. And you'll have to come back because it's still early days for houseware. And I feel like this is not going to end soon. And I want to be part of this storytelling journey so that people can understand not just what the struggles and the challenges are, but how you've attacked them. I really appreciate it. Shubhankar, Srivastava, and Divyansh Saini, co-founders at Houseware. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Thank you so much, Michael. It was an absolute pleasure to be speaking with you. And yeah, look forward to being back again soon.
Awesome.
Thanks, Michael.